War is a terrible thing. But today's poem, war is a terrible thing, like that's not obvious. But today's poem raises an interesting meta level question on the subject for something which is already played out. Welcome to Strip Coverlet, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Fort, and we're here for another poetry discussion. This will be found in the poetry discussion playlist, now a playlist now reaching 600 videos strong. The poem in question is Deaths and Entrances by Dylan Thomas, and it reads as such. On almost the incendiary eve of several near deaths, when one at the great least of your best loved, and always known must leave, lions and fires of his flying breath, of your immortal friends, who'd raise the organs of the counted dust to shoot and sing your praise, one who called deepest down shall hold his peace, that cannot sink or cease endlessly to his wound. In many married London's estranging grief, on almost the incendiary eve, when at your lips and keys locking, unlocking, the murdered strangers weave, one who is most unknown, your pole star neighbor, son of another street, will dive up to his tears. He'll bathe his raining blood in the male sea, who strode from your own dead, and wind his globe out of your water thread, and load the throats of shells with every cry since light flashed first across his thunderclapping eyes. On almost the incendiary eve of deaths and entrances, when near and strange wounded on London's waves have sought your single grave, one enemy of many who knows well your heart is luminous, in the watched dark quivering through locks and caves, will pull the thunderbolts to shut the sun, plunge, mount your darkened keys, and sear just riders back until that one loved least looms the last Samson of your zodiac. Now, I think that it would be very difficult to pull from the text itself, but everywhere you go to find what this poem is about, it will tell you this poem is about the aftermath of World War II. Also, in my opinion, very difficult to tell from this poem, Dylan Thomas, the author of this poem, wrote the best known villanelle. Do not go into that dark night. I just butchered that, and I can't think of the title of the poem. Oh well, Dylan Thomas villanelle. Google it, you'll find it. Best known villanelle of all time. You could not tell that from this poem. This is a very creaky, cranky poem, in my opinion, and I think that this poem is not poorly written. It is written with a very difficult type of rhythm that you can't just glide through. Do not go gentle into that good night is the villanelle. That villanelle is so well written that it will, probably until the end of time, be the best known villanelle of all time because it is very smooth. There is a very definitive rhythm to it. There's no rhythm to this poem. Not that I can find. Not easily. Pardon me. The Language in this poem is not complimentary, I would say. The images that you get from this poem are not easy. They are not obvious. They are not obviated by the poem itself. In my opinion, this poem, pardon me, very difficult, which is fine. But Dylan Thomas did not have to write difficult poetry. He was very good with the language. So here's my question. Here's my observation, the meta deal to take from this. World War I. There was a movement in World War I, a literary movement from World War I. The trench poets, just sort of skimming off the fat of the movement itself. The Glory of Women, great poem. Dulce et Decorum Est, great poem. Break of Day in the Trenches, great poem. Futility, great poem. They, great poem. All of these are great poems that came from World War I. World War I was a war with a great literary tradition. Soldiers were sent to war with books of poetry on them, composed poetry while injured. Terrible war, horrible war, called the Great War, called the war to end all wars. It was not the war that ended all wars. I apologize. A generation later, there was another war that almost did end all wars. Was there something so demonstrably terrible about that entire war that it broke literature? That it broke the storytelling apparatus of humankind? That everything which happened, all of the dictators, all of the atrocity, it happened at such a scale, it happened to such a degree, it happened to an extent which was unfathomable to the human mind, so that afterwards anything that we could think of was temporarily on hold. There is even, in my opinion, a lack of great literature about World War II. When you think of the outsized impact that World War II had on the human experience, on human culture, on any and everything it is that humans do, I want you to tell me the greatest story about it. It is almost as if that war and everything that happened everywhere in the world, as dark as it was for those years, created a void in the human experience that we're still getting over. World War I, awful. Really nasty stuff happened. Really nasty stuff happened on the battlefield. World War I, one of the first wars where basically the capability of being a warrior didn't matter. Erased. You're not going to out-warrior a Gatling gun. You're not going to out-warrior mustard gas. You're not going to out-warrior getting caught in no man's land and just being a bullet pinata. You don't out-warrior that. You're not going to out-tough that. You're not going to be stronger than that. There's no way to be faster than that. literally changed the entire concept that humans had of themselves. That war, World War I. No longer were people able to think to themselves, well, we're the bigger, tougher, stronger, faster tribe. We can keep the peace. Even if you wanted to be the good guys, being bigger, stronger, tougher, faster didn't matter anymore. Did not matter anymore. That concept of what safety was erased. Overnight. Didn't matter. Gone. Changed the definition that we have of safety, the definition that we have of war, the definition we have of being a warrior, the definition we have of what it means to look forward to a tomorrow. World War I did. Didn't matter. There was still literature that came of it. That conceptual change was overshadowed by the human spirit enduring. The human spirit endured, took the terrible consequences, shortcomings of our entire species, digested them, and kicked out a type of literature that forced every single person to change at least a little bit, to allowed our entire species to have some sort of closure with the Great War. World War II, in my opinion, does not have that. The closest we have, really, are explorations into fictions around the actual people. The closest we have, really, are close to accurate, or as accurate as possible, retellings of the actual events. I'm willing to be wrong. I'm willing to accept you putting in the comments the greatest poem about World War II that you know of. Now, don't get me wrong. There is a very long history of poetry about the Holocaust itself that is mind-bending, the literature there. I think that's separate. That's not the war itself. The Holocaust as separate and unique from the war as a literary movement, in my opinion, has to be, I think those two things have to be dichotomized, because one part of that is purely the experience. The Jews at that time weren't waging war. They were being annihilated. The only way to say it. That's a different experience than being an actor in a nation war. But why? Why is there such a lack? And maybe I'm just not well versed. I mean, I know Slaughterhouse-Five, great book. It's about someone who was in the war. I don't know that I would put it anywhere near on the same shelf as the Trench Poets. I just don't think I could bring myself to do that. Loved Slaughterhouse-Five. Period of my life where Slaughterhouse-Five was my favorite book. I could not put that on the same shelf as the Trench Poets. It's not one and the same to me. So is there something about World War II that makes the human spirit turn off and say, look, I could write the poem. It would be nowhere near as impactful as the things which actually happened. So why go through the trouble? Is that the lesson that we learn from perhaps humankind's darkest hour? That's all I have for this poetry discussion. If you like or appreciate what it is that I do here, hitting the like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers. If you find yourself here by chance but not design, consider hitting the subscribe button in order to stay around for more literature in the future. And as always, I hope to have you back for the next one.